People always say when you want to start getting serious about guitar, you have to start playing to a metronome.
With the metronome.
Metronome.
How to actually use the
You ever
metronome.
tried using a metronome and felt like you just didn't have what it takes, or maybe that you just weren't in sync with it? Well, don't worry. I think every guitar has.
But what if I told you to stop practicing with a metronome? Like, not all the time, but at least sometimes, because a metronome is a great tool for building like consistency, but the skill you really need, but don't necessarily practice, is the ability to play guitar and listen and react at the same time while being in time. Like, if you can't play along to a metronome, you probably can't really play along with a drummer or a bass player, which frankly is embarrassing. They only have 4 strings. But that's one of the reasons it's so important to practice with a metronome. Otherwise, you get into a practice room or recording studio and you're stuck trying to time your own like unique sense of timing to fit in with like actual timing. But practicing your timing without a metronome is also important because there will be sections of songs where you're expected to keep the beat. Like say if the other instruments drop out and it's just you and the singer, or like if you want to play acoustic gigs with just you or you or the singer. And if your timing is all over the place in those situations, it's not going to be pretty. So every once in a while, record yourself playing without a click. Focus on playing with solid timing and then listen back to see how you did. You might be surprised how hard you're leaning on the metronome to help you stay on beat. Speaking of recording yourself, that's not just helpful for timing. Listening back to your own performances is the best way to judge your progress. When you're focused on playing, it's actually kind of hard to like at the same time sort of be outside yourself, analyzing your timing, how clean your bends are, how consistent your dynamics are, or like just the general feel of your playing. When you play with a band and you fumble, sometimes you think you pulled it off and nobody noticed until the bass player makes a sideward comment, and then you have to remind them that they only play 4 strings, so stay in their lane. But when it's just you playing and you don't have anyone to call you out, your brain can be pretty forgiving. So you might be like finishing one bar down in the Neil Young area and then starting the next bar up in the Angus Young area, and you kind of flub the transition. So really you should practice that bit more, but your brain is like, nah, that was fine, you've got it, it's good. And you just move on. So get out your phone, start a voice memo, and give yourself an honest progress check every once in a while. And while you're at it, one thing a lot of guitarists do without realizing is making a bunch of extra noise in between chords or notes. Now, that can be fine in the heat of a moment in a live situation, especially if your band is like venue with a sticky floor stage of your career. But in the studio or in a venue with a proper mix, stuff like this will stick out like a sore thumb. So take some time to clean it up, make it sound like this. And your bandmates will thank you. Now, a lot of our students at Killer Guitar Academy have the same handful of bad habits when they're just starting out. It's pretty common for beginners to do everything in a linear fashion. So they go up the scale in order, come back down the scale in order, move from the low strings to the high strings and high strings to the low strings and so on and so forth. But songs aren't written that way. And at some point you really need to break out of that linear thinking and linear playing. So once you're familiar with a scale or a pattern, try starting it in the middle, or try skipping over every second string, or try like repeating every second string. What you really want to avoid is getting too stuck in the forwards and backwards pattern starting on note 1 every time, because when you actually want to use it, you'll just sound like you're playing a scale. Another bad practice habit that we see all the time is students practicing a part up until they can play it to speed just once and then moving on to the next thing. Now, there's a great phrase, don't practice until you get it right, practice until you can't get it wrong. And that definitely applies to improving at the guitar. If you just barely skate by in a certain part, run it a few more times until it becomes comfortable before you move on. You'll start building muscle memory and actually improve instead of just getting lucky. Another super helpful practice tip is to get used to starting licks in different spots around the neck. Like, you can play in just about any key, starting in any position, but if, for example, you always associate the B minor scale with the 7th fret, then you might have a hard time going from like a B minor chord that's down on the 2nd fret up to your lead part. If you're familiar with the different places across the neck that you can play different scales, it'll be a lot easier to switch from rhythm to lead without messing up. Now, the cage system is actually pretty handy for exactly that, and we'll leave a link in the pinned comment for little video you can check out that'll give you more on that. So most of our students also fall into one of two categories, right? There's the figure it out by ear camp, and then the where's the tab camp. Now, both are acceptable depending on like your own personal goals, but it's smart for guitar players to spend a little bit of time dipping their toes in the water of the opposite group. If you're a tab person, you might get put in a situation where you're expected to learn something without a tab, especially in a practice room or at a jam. And then if you're an ear person, you might end up in a situation where a part is like too crazy to figure out by ear, or like you just don't have the time to analyze the whole song or the whole solo. So you just have to like pull out Songster or Ultimate Guitar or whatever and just get ready for the gig. Either way, the last thing you want to do is to have to like suddenly develop this new skill in a crunch situation. So being at least somewhat comfortable with both methods, it's going to help you be prepared for whatever's thrown your way. Okay, so let's talk about setups. If you sometimes feel like your guitars go out of tune within like a minute or two of tuning them up, there's really three main culprits you should check for. So the first thing you should address is your tuning technique. And yes, there is proper tuning technique. When you first strike a string, that's the attack of the note, right? And then the decay is the part of the note that rings out. The attack will be slightly sharper than the decay since the string is vibrating harder from being hit. So if you're playing like an aggressive fast song where you're strumming hard, tune to the attack by like hitting the string over and over and over without giving it any time to decay. And then if you're playing a slower tune with lots of long notes, wait for the attack to end and then tune for the decay instead. That will take a little bit of trial and error, but it makes a huge difference in being in tune all the time. So the second cause may be that you're not tuning up to pitch. So when you tighten a string to raise the pitch, you're removing slack from the strings, right? So as it gets tighter, when you stop, it's pretty much set in the right place. Now, when you loosen the string, you're adding slack. So the guitar's nut may end up catching some of the slack and then letting it go over time. So when you're tuning, you should detune to below the note and then tighten the string back up until it's in pitch. The third potential issue is also related to the nut. If your nut has residue built up in the string slots or has like a burr developing or it just needs some lubrication, that can lead to tuning stability problems as well. Thankfully, it's a pretty easy fix. So you can either like lubricate it with a PTFE grease, or you can take a pencil and get some of the graphite in the slot. This allows the string to glide smoothly in its slot instead of getting hung up. Now, one mod the guitarists make all the time is swapping pickups because it's a great way to change up your tone. But before you do that, you should experiment with pickup height. Moving the pickup closer or further away from the strings actually makes a big difference on how hot your tone is. But you can also angle the pickup to be like closer to the bass or treble strings, which adjusts the overall brightness or darkness of the pickup without having to swap it out or buy a new pickup. We also have a free set of videos explaining how to make those adjustments, plus some PDFs of suggested pickup heights. If you want to try them out for yourself, just check out the link in the pinned comment. If you do decide to change your pickups or like make any kind of modifications to your guitar, especially the wiring, a huge tip is to take a picture of what it looks like before you get started. Knowing which wire goes where or like how the hardware is aligned, it's going to make it much easier to put it back together or put it back to the original spec if you don't end up liking the modification you've made. Now, one thing that so many guitarists don't realize is that your amp sounds completely different based on your proximity to it. So if you do all of your adjustments standing like right over the thing, it's going to sound totally different to how it does in the crowd. You're basically standing above or like typically behind the speaker, so you can't expect it to be accurate, right? Once you've got your tone dialed in, hop off the stage and give it a listen from the audience's perspective. You might just be surprised how much it changes. You might also be surprised how well your tone works when you're playing by yourself versus when you're playing with a band. Like fitting into a full band with a bassist, a drummer, or a singer, it sometimes means your optimal at-home tone is just wrong. Like, you have to remember that the guitar is a mid-range instrument. So you've got to give your bassist room to fill in the low end and then let the brightest highs go to the singer. And that'll make you a hero to sound guys around the world. In the same vein, you're even more of a hero if you only play when it's your turn. This applies to like sound checks, jam nights, practice, really anywhere you're playing with other people. Like noodling is fun, but if everyone has to talk over your noodling to have a conversation between songs, that's a problem. And here's a fun story for you, right? When I went to see Discharge back in like 2012 or 2013, the guitar player kept just playing like these random bits and pieces in between songs. So the guy doing the sound muted the guitar through the PA when the band wasn't playing. And then the guy from Def Heaven did the same thing when I saw them in 2015, but the sound guy didn't mute him, and like it really distracted from the little like interlude vignettes they had playing in between songs. Now, a big tip when you're going to the studio or have a gig coming up is to do your string changes a day or two in advance. Brand new strings will need some time to settle into your instrument, so give them some time to get stretched out before your performance. I learned this the hard way when a band I was in opened for like Lagwagon Veil and Bouncing Souls in 1999, and I spent the whole set fighting with my guitar to keep it in tune. The other thing is that fresh strings are also the brightest in tone, so if you've dialed in your tone with warm strings, you want to give those new strings a little bit of time to lose that initial brightness before you go changing all of your settings. Okay, so last one. A big tip for playing solos or lead lines is to focus on the pitch of your bends and vibrato. Pro guitarists will be expected to have in-tune bends and intentionally placed vibrato. Out-of-tune bends or vibrato that goes like sharp or flat, it's a surefire way to make you sound like an amateur. If your ear isn't super developed, a good way to practice this is to hit the target note without bending and then bend to get there, like this. This gives you a reference point to aim for, so you can start building that muscle memory, and it improves your ear when it comes to bending and key. All right, so that's our list for today. If there's any you disagree with, leave a comment below. If there's anything you feel like we left out, leave a comment on that as well. Let's have a good old-fashioned online argument. Now, don't forget to check the pinned comment and the description for all of the free videos that we mentioned come with this one. And when you're ready to move on, watch this video next.